Well, our big focus, as US President-elect Donald Trump plans his return to the White House, he's weighing who to include in his new cabinet. Reports say Trump is leaning towards choosing more outsiders, so business leaders, loyalists, and non-politicians, rather than sitting lawmakers. In fact, sources close to the transition team say Trump believes his first-term outsider picks like HED Secretary Ben Carson were more loyal and successful than some of the lawmakers he appointed. We're also hearing that Trump is also wary of special elections to replace sitting lawmakers, especially in the Senate. But Natasha is tracking the insider details for us. She joins us live at the moment, as Susie Wiles has also been chosen as senior campaign advisor to serve as the White House Chief of Staff. Natasha, we're hearing of a lot of top appointments to be made in the next few hours. How is the mood and approach of Trump's 2024 transition different from the 2016 one and also 2021 when Biden made his during election results pushback and uncertainty from Trump? Also, if you can share some key names already emerging for the top positions with our viewers.
Absolutely, but it's not going to be days. This is going to go on for weeks in terms of naming the key posts, and very different from 2016 when Trump was actually not expected to win that presidential race. Neither was expected on this round. It was supposed to be close, but he's made clear victory. But in 2024, he's definitely more prepared than what he was in 2016. Now he's going to have to appoint 4,000 government positions. That's a big number. And this includes 1,200 that require Senate confirmation. And given that the GOP has had a big showing, successful in the Congress this time in the elections, that should be less of a problem for him this time in 2024 in terms of getting those Senate confirmations. Regards to 2021, yes, Trump had contested the elections at that time, really pushed back in terms of all kinds of legal challenges, and that delayed the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. In fact, Joe Biden and his team was not able to really get going till after the disputes were settled, which was November 30th. But now things are moving very quickly because President Joe Biden has been very clear that he is going to support the transition. In fact, the Democrats made a big point out of the fact that this transition is going to be peaceful, and they're committed to helping Donald Trump, really making a point that Donald Trump had not extended that courtesy when he lost in 2021. So expected to be smoother this time. He's expected to be better prepared. And some of the names that we're hearing for Secretary of State are Senator Marco Rubio. We're hearing of Bill Hagerty and Richard Grenell. These are some of the top names that are coming up for Secretary of State. And when it comes to Defense Secretary, a very familiar face, Mike Pompeo, who's a former CIA director and also the Secretary of State. So he's one of the top contenders when it comes to that category. And as we were indicating earlier in the broadcast, there's a good chance that Susie Wiles, one of Trump's campaign managers, will serve as his White House Chief of Staff. She's to be very disciplined in her approach, and that's something that we might see with this transition.
Thanks so much, Natasha, as always, for joining us with the insider details. As Natasha's reporting, in fact, Susie Wiles' leadership is widely credited with helping to professionalize the Trump campaign. And after Trump hit that political low in 2021, after roundly condemning for enabling the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol building, he hired Wiles to help guide his unlikely comeback. Meanwhile, in his first speech after the 2024 election, US President Joe Biden referred to Vice President Kamala Harris's defeat by Donald Trump as a setback. He also added that you cannot love your country only when you win. But Biden said he's directed his administration to work with Trump's team for a peaceful transition of power. He also stressed the integrity of the election, calling it honest, fair, and transparent. However, you must note his statement made no mention of Trump, who will bookend Biden's sole term in office.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory, and I assured him that I would direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve. We're leaving behind the strongest economy in the world.
In other crucial news, US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has said he would not resign if he received any pressure from Donald Trump's new administration to step down as the central bank lowered interest rates by a quarter point. And Trump has been a persistent critic of the Fed and its independence, as you are well aware, calling its officials boneheads in his last administration and also arguing that he should have a role in setting interest rates. The Fed, though, lowered interest rates by a quarter point, knocking them down for the second time in a row as inflation continues to ease and a Trump presidency hangs over the central bank. So rates now stand at 4.5% to 4.75%, down from a decade's high level of 5.25% to 5.5%. Here's what the Fed chairman had to say. In other crucial news, well, North Korea's involvement in Ukraine has drawn China into a bit of a delicate act. Is Beijing in a tough spot now with North Korea's deployment in Russia's war in Ukraine? Well, to find out more and to decipher the exact details, we have with us China expert Professor Avinash Godbole. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us on NDTV.
Thank you for having me.
Professor, how is China reacting to the increasing cooperation between North Korea and Russia? Does this shift in North Korean alignment actually signal any potential changes in China's foreign policy or strategic interests?
I think China will not like the recent development because it will put a lot of pressure back on China. First of all, it shows that there's an erosion of influence that China has had over Pyongyang. For stability of the region and for other places. There's a possibility that the North Korean troops that are fighting on behalf of Russia are fighting along the Russian troops, and these are specialized units that are supposed to take back some of the provinces taken over by the Ukrainian forces. So their presence might be time-bound. But again, for China, it creates headaches. It's not good for them. It shows erosion of China's influence in the region. It will mean there'll be more scrutiny of Chinese actions. There'll be more expectations from them. And what has helped China over the last 3 years was that Russia had become the bad boy in the world. And then with this recent news, the focus will shift back to China. There'll be more expectations from China to act tough on North Korea. And to also, it will put in question China's neutrality position in the overall crisis. So far, they have been criticizing Ukraine subtly that the crisis is because of the Western influence and the world should remain neutral. But China no longer can take that stance as the things stand today.
In fact, many actually argue that the entry of North Korean troops risks a dangerous escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war, while also putting Beijing in a bit of a tight spot. But how could this new phase of North Korean-Russian cooperation then influence the stability of the broader East Asian region, sir?
It will destabilize East Asia because there's news that there are 10,000 soldiers already in Russia, about 6,000 closer to the active duty. And there's a possibility that the numbers will increase by another 2,000 by end of November, and then one more 1,000, so total 13,000 by end of December. So there'll be more pressure on China. There'll be more satellite as well as ground presence. We might see maneuvering of the American naval ships closer to the North Korean borders, the North Korean waters, as well as there's an intent by South Korea to send weapons to Ukraine now that has been expressed over the last 48 hours. So this more active participation by other countries can take this situation to the not just a bilateral war, but to a global war, which it was under the covers so far. But openly, it will become a more multi-party war. And that is not good for China. China's economy is not in good shape. They want stability. They also have to deal with Trump now, so it makes things certainly difficult for China.
Indeed. In fact, it can also raise serious questions as far as regional stability is concerned. Professor Godbole, Mao had once upon a time reportedly said that without the lips, the teeth are cold when describing China's relationship with North Korea. How does this historical analogy still shape China's strategic approach to North Korea today?
Well, China has since then become pragmatic. It is not exporting communism to other countries, but then they still want to maintain North Korea the way it is. They would still like to avoid the American intervention in the region. China has maintained a delicate balance of its relations between Japan and South Korea. They have reinstated the trilateral dialogue, which had gone down before COVID only recently. So China would want to maintain that stability in the North Korea. And the more pressure there is on North Korea on economic terms, there's more pressure on China to act, to provide aid, to consider the prospect of refugees on its border as well. If the North Korean regime were to collapse because of any other consequent actions by the Americans later. So they want stability in the region and in the North Korea as well, from their selfish reasons as well. Not so much because of ideological perspective anymore, but from their selfish strategic reasons at this point, I would think dictates more.
Well, Professor Godbole, thank you so much for shedding light on these crucial aspects. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates as and when we see further developments. With that, let's turn our attention now to the Iran aspect of what Trump's win actually means for the United States foreign policy. In fact, Iran has called on Trump to review the US government approach to the region. As you know, Trump's first term in the White House was not ideal for Iran's foreign policy in specific. But what exactly does Trump 2.0 mean for not just the United States, but the world? Here's our report.
So Donald Trump's return to the White House has potential to reshape the US's foreign policy. Trump has said in the past that he will end the Russia-Ukraine war in a day when he makes a comeback to the White House. Although he hasn't provided any specifics about the plans, the war has been going on for more than 2.5 years now, and there seems to be no end in sight. The conflict-ridden Middle East will be one of the key areas for the incoming Trump administration. Trump has promised to bring peace to the region, but then again, he hasn't given any details on how he plans to stop the two big conflicts in the region, which involve Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah. These conflicts have killed more than 45,000 people, most of them women and children in Gaza. There is no ceasefire deal in sight at the moment, and how Trump steers the Gaza and Lebanon ceasefire deals remains to be seen. Now to China. How Trump manages relations with China is one of the most talked about topics when it comes to US's foreign policy. Experts suggest that Trump is likely to increase import tariffs on China, which would most likely invite countermeasures from China. On the other hand, there is also a likelihood that Trump could be open to pragmatic deals with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Well, for further clarity as far as Iran's affairs are concerned, we have with us Dr. Reza Khanzadeh. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, Dr. Reza. There are still comprehensive sanctions on Iran, as we are aware, but the Biden administration, as many have pointed out, has tended to look the other way at Iran's oil sales. Are officials in Iran now worried about Trump's return and perhaps the prospect of tougher sanctions enforcement? You believe something will change in the US-Iran relationship?
Thanks for having me. Yes, I do believe there is a high potential for there to be a change in the U.S. and Iran relationship for a whole host of reasons. The one most important that I think hasn't been talked too much on the news circuit is the age of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. He will be 86 years old when Trump is in his first year as president, and 4 years into Trump's presidency, Khamenei will reach 90 years old if he makes it to 90. And there's been, quiet whispers and rumors that Khamenei does have a terminal illness, so he may not even live past Trump's full 4 years as president. So keeping that in mind, on top of all the internal turmoil that's going on in Iran, particularly with the Women Like Freedom protests, there is a domestic pressure on the regime to think for a long-term strategy beyond just Trump and beyond just Khamenei, because he will pass away. They need to find some type of off-ramp with these conflicts to where their own existence, the regime's own existence, can sustain beyond Khamenei's passing. So with that in mind, and also with the new president of Iran, publicly talking about wanting to, strike a deal with the U.S. and lift sanctions and exactly, yeah. So there could be a way for the two to strike a deal. And also Trump has talked about how he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize and he wants to end the wars and he wants to be like this hero or savior for the Middle East. And although
local papers in Iran, though, today, the newspaper Hamshari actually put an artist's rendering of Trump in an orange prison jumpsuit and the handcuffs under the headline, Return of the Murderer, while in fact a hardline local publication said it was back to the crime scene. Dr. Reza, is there then any reason to be hopeful with Trump back in the White House for Iran?
It is, because you have to keep in mind these magazines and newspapers and media outlets inside Iran are all controlled by the regime in some shape or form. There isn't, freedom of press in Iran to the way that we understand it in like the, global north or in, countries like America or in Europe. So when we see these types of ads and these types of articles, we should consider it with, with some type of, understanding that this is more, appeasing to the people within the regime, but then also the citizens within Iran to try to continue that narrative that, U.S. is the enemy and we can't trust them and, there's no way we can strike a deal. It's kind of the same way that Trump, speaks a loud game, but then when push comes to shove, he is pragmatic and he is able to find a way to make a deal. Because if we think back during his first term, although he did assassinate, Qasem Soleimani, he had multiple attempts to actually strike militarily on Iran's nuclear sites and also their military sites, but he didn't because he understood that there's a calculation in that. And although he seems erratic, President Trump, although he may seem erratic and he may seem unpredictable, I feel that's a part of his strategy to try to keep his enemies, in this case Iran, on their toes and not understanding what his next move may be.
Well, some geopolitical analysts have argued that it really depends on Trump's calculations when it comes to Trump 2.0, whether he wants to be the guy who got the better deal, consistent with his self-image as master deal maker, as you are highlighting, or does he want to ensure that Americans enjoy cheap oil and gas? But whether he can do both is also an option that has not entirely been ruled out yet, as is the case with Trump. But Dr. Khalzadeh, as always, it's a pleasure to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, as Donald Trump prepares for a possible second term, Iranians are split on what lies ahead. Some fear it could lead to an all-out war between Tehran and Washington, especially with ongoing conflicts in the region. Others hope Trump might surprise them with diplomacy like he did with North Korea in Trump 1.0. But the US is geared for Trump 2.0. We are meanwhile taking a very small break. We're back in a moment. Do stay tuned. Well, Germany's leader will skip next week's COP29 in Azerbaijan, dealing a further blow to the climate summit that was already overshadowed by Donald Trump's election. Olaf Scholz no longer plans to attend the conference after the German governing coalition collapsed, meaning only two G7 leaders, that's the UK's Keir Starmer and Italy's Giorgia Meloni, will be there in Azerbaijan for the climate summit. Expectations for this conference, which aims to focus on funding the energy transition in developing countries, were already low given the economic and political headwinds surrounding it.
Mr. President.
Well, let's switch tracks now. Well, the Bank of England cut its key interest rate for the second time this year, but warned that the Labour government's budget will keep inflation higher for longer than previously expected. The Monetary Policy Committee voted decisively to lower the bank rate by 0.25 percentage points to 4.75%, But the bank kept to its line. A gradual approach to removing policy restraint remains appropriate, warning that it now sees inflation staying above its medium-term target of 2% until the second quarter of 2027. That's more than a year longer than it had expected in August. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated his dear friend Donald Trump on his election victory. And in fact, Russia now says that Moscow is keen on a dialogue with the US president-elect. Putin said Trump behaved, in his opinion, and I quote, in a very correct way, courageously like a real man, after he survived an assassination attempt at a rally in Pennsylvania. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you as always. Do stay tuned.